Welcome to the session today on esports, something that is certainly a buzzword out there, but there's actually a lot of activity in the world of esports, as you know. And Mike, I just saw him last week up at the Overwatch League, which, how many of you guys have heard of the Overwatch League? All right, so we have an audience that knows Overwatch League, the team at MLG, which Mike co-founded how many years ago? Over a decade, right?
15 years ago, yeah.
15 years ago. So before esports was the vogue thing to be talking about, Mike and Sundance started Major League Gaming 15 years ago with a view that, I guess, competitive play in gaming was going to turn into something, right?
Yeah, so I think there was some activity already happening in South Korea, which is sort of the home base of esports traditionally. And as 15 years ago was really the first time that consoles were going online. And so we saw an opportunity to help spread competitive gaming across the US and North America and in kind of a more traditional US sports model. And that was the original vision. And like you said, 15 years later, we launched Overwatch League as part of Activision Blizzard, and it's a city-based franchise system, much like the NBA. We spent a couple of years inside of Activision and Blizzard kind of developing how that structure, what that structure would look like in order for it to be commercially successful and successful for the fans and the teams and players. And it winds up being a lot like the NBA or the NFL, which was kind of the original vision.
Yeah, and so I was there last week. They started their first games on Wednesday, 16 games a week. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and as you may have seen in the news last week, you announced that it's in partnership with Twitch. Twitch is broadcasting it, exclusive third-party partner here and everywhere in the world except China. So tell us a bit about it. I'm sure people have seen the news. How did it perform compared to what expectations were? You guys certainly made a lot of noise about, we've all read the stories about how much teams had to pay to invest to be part of Overwatch League. You guys went very big, Activision style. How were the sort of the viewership results, or how do you judge week one?
I was thrilled, actually. I think at the start of any new league or any new media property, usually things tend to kind of slow build over time. And certainly that's the idea of the structure for the league. Like Jeff said, it's a very long season. It started last week. It goes all the way through August. It's 4 nights a week, 4 matches a week between teams. So there's a lot of content being pushed out. And I think the hope was that we have enough content for a slow and steady ramp across the full season. So the reality was, we blew way past my expectations for the first week. And on the first night of games, we broke over 425,000 concurrents on Twitch, which is just 3 of the streams: English, Korean, and French. There's also all of the streams in China. There's the MLG TV video network that powers some of the outlets on the Blizzard sites and apps. So I think all of the numbers, I hope, will come out in official form tomorrow. But across the board, we were absolutely thrilled. And if you think about, say it's an average of 300-something thousand viewers, that puts you on par with traditional televised sports in terms of viewers per game metric that you get through TV. So to be even in that conversation in the first week, I think made everybody thrilled, us, our sponsors, the players. So,
yeah, and for me, I found, I was in television business for a long time and then broke away and did the Game Awards as a digital-only property. And my belief is, the people that are playing these games, 35+ million strong Overwatch fans, they're on computers, they're on Twitch, YouTube. How important is a TV deal? We've seen, Turner do the E-League. I'm not a big believer in TV being the place to watch these games, because if people are playing games, they want to watch them on digital platforms. But what's your view? Like, you're posting TV level numbers on Twitch, and those are global numbers versus domestic. But still, how important is TV to the Overwatch League to make it successful?
Yeah, I don't think it's important at all, actually. And I think, as you know, I did the first esports TV deal outside of Korea in 2006 with USA Network and NBC Sports. And back then, over a decade ago, it was, I think, pretty important to the overall mix. It was important to kind of give credibility, to get additional advertisers.
Well, and there wasn't
even
like HD TV back then,
right.
And I mean, it's like if you wanted to see good quality video,
there was no Twitch. There wasn't really a YouTube.
YouTube
yet.
was just starting out then, yeah.
So it was very early. But now, because we have very mature digital broadcasting platforms that are regionalized, that have good, sufficient, in some cases, great, in some cases, advertising platforms, they're now monetizable in a way that they weren't before. And you can see that because, although I can't say it, everybody, I think, read what the numbers were on the Twitch deal last week. So clearly, the platforms see the value in exclusive premium content in the esports space. That means that they can monetize it themselves. And so I think that's one of the things that I'm most happy about with the structure and the launch of the Overwatch League, is that the way that we've structured it, although a lot of the components of it were very not native or counter to a lot of the ways that the esports world has grown up in a very organic setting. A lot of those things are what create the structure and the stability and really kind of the commercial engine underneath the league to be able to do these things effectively.
Yeah, so we all saw the news of a big deal with Twitch. How does that work from a business perspective? Because you guys are bringing a lot of sponsors. You've announced, I think HP, Intel, flagship sponsors of the league. Twitch is obviously buying rights to it. So you guys sell some sponsorships for the league, but then how does Twitch monetize that? I know it's more a question for them, but they're able to sort of sell advertising around it as well?
Yeah, so they have some advertising rights around the content. I think, what's different, there's a lot of elements of this that look just like a typical sports league deal with ESPN or NBC or CBS. The elements that are different are probably how across the board esports content is monetized differently because it is digital, and can take advantage of the interaction between viewers watching on a digital platform and playing the game. And obviously there's in-game items and microtransaction revenue and things like that that we can share with platforms that become a new retail channel for us too. So I think that's pretty early stage, but it's going to develop very quickly.
No, that's I think a great point is that this is not just a video feed. It's really a much deeper partnership, and I found with things like in-game incentives now, and we did that a lot around the Game Awards, where it's, hey, watch the show and you might have a chance of winning a game, or other things. Twitch has a lot of technologies you may have heard of, like Twitch drops. We did a thing with Twitch actually around the Game Awards with a Twitch extension, which allowed people to interact with the show live and actually predict who they thought were going to win certain awards. And I know you guys haven't done a lot of that yet, but I imagine that's on the roadmap to make the stream interactive. And I know you're not even doing drops yet, but that's on the roadmap, right? Yeah,
I think all of these things are obvious places for us to create new revenue streams. We also have the MLG network that came with MLG when we were acquired. So that's another area, kind of like a innovation sandbox that we can play around with. And we have obviously all part of the same company, so we're closer to the studios that are actually developing the games, and we can do interesting stuff with that data and things like that. But look, we've seen Twitch now for a while really innovating in the space outside of purely advertising. Creating interactive opportunities for additional revenue. And I think that will help drive the value of the content itself, which is good for everybody in the space. And we can innovate with our own platform and play around with it and find new ways to make money. But I think that from that perspective, it's early days. At the same time, it's early in the life cycle of the development of these things, but it's already a lot of money. It's tens of millions of dollars, not tens of thousands. And so that's another major difference, that with that kind of revenue being generated, now this is a real platform that we can continue to reinvest in.
Where are you finding the viewership coming from? Is it domestic audiences watching Overwatch League? We know China is massive. You look at something like the League of Legends finals, and there are tens of millions of concurrent people watching in China. And domestic market is good, but it's not that size. Week 1 Overwatch League, where were the audience coming from?
I think we'll be surprised at how big the domestic audience is. I don't have the numbers to tell you today, but hopefully we'll see them this week. I think China is a little bit of an unknown for us at this point. We know obviously how many players are playing in places like China, the US, Korea, the really big markets for us. But how that translates into viewership, I think, will be interesting. One of the things that I saw that I think you saw too, Jeff, that was really interesting for me was when local city teams were playing, that those teams were sponsoring kind of like big sports
Actually, in
bar
San
nights.
Francisco, there was like a sports bar. And
Yeah,
like,
so
it's
there's
crazy.
huge sports bar takeovers in these cities that are, you know, even in Boston, which doesn't get more of a traditional sports town than Boston, you know, in a sports bar where usually right now they'd be watching the Celtics and the Bruins, they were watching the Boston Overwatch team. So I saw a lot of that in Houston. I think there was over 600 people in one bar just to watch the Houston team play. So. You know, there's a lot of, I think that the city association, which was one of the things that, as kind of the traditional esports guy, I got a lot of flack from our relatively vocal community.
Yep.
Right? That it didn't make any sense. This is an online game. Why would you put people in different cities? The reason is because you can build fan appreciation. You kind of extend outside of just the core players.
And some of the, you know, the owners or, you know, Cloud9, other teams, they don't get to be there. You know, a lot of teams have developed brands in esports. They weren't allowed to use their own kind of brand. They had to, you know, come up with, you know, I think it's like London Spitfire, and you guys came up with these sort of fictional teams. You know, obviously a controversial decision at the time, but that was, you said, based around kind of building a new IP that I guess everyone co-owns together?
Yeah, so it's, we really wanted to have a fresh start. While some of the esports organizations like Cloud9 and Optic obviously have huge existing brand awareness and social network reach, we wanted this to be a brand new league. And I think, you know, there was probably more resistance from the fans. I think that the team owners kind of understood the logic behind it. Creates some complication, and they got to create a new brand, but they can tap into that existing fan base that they have. And then in terms of, you know, all of the commercial applications, from licensing and merchandising to eventually building arenas in those hometowns and building new brands around it, it was really important to have a clean slate to start with.
So, you know, you've been in the esports space for over a decade. Where are we at right now compared to where you think we're going to go? I mean, I look at something like Overwatch, and, you know, I think for a long time there was this mythical view that, you know, esports is only going to arrive if it's on television and we can get everyone who watches football to watch this. But when you think of something like Overwatch, 35 million players, there are a lot of Overwatch players that still aren't even watching esports yet. So that's, to me, is like the first thing, is just getting all these gamers to tune in and be a part of it. How big can this grow? I mean, a lot of people are, it's like, is this the next NFL or NBA? I mean, you know, kids, they're not watching traditional sports, they're watching esports. I mean, what's your prognostication on how big this gets?
So I think if you look at every relevant macro trend, a lot of it points to esports as a whole getting much bigger. So without talking about any particular game or league, traditional sports viewership is down. You know, Monday Night Football ratings are down 9% this month. ESPN's been losing subscribers for a couple of years now. The traditional linear television and sports world is losing people, and it's mostly losing younger people. A lot of that is because they're locked into linear television deals where young people are just not watching. But also, I think, you know, the average or the median age of fans in traditional sports, I think baseball's the oldest, and it's well over 60. The NFL's in the 50s. So you're talking about a much older demographic being interested in that, while a lot more people kind of 34 and below are spending a lot more time playing games and now a lot more time watching games. So I think all of those sort of macro things are pointing in the right direction. It's also a global audience, right? Because we're digital, we can tap into an instantaneous global live audience. We can create all these communities around the games and the IP and the teams and the leagues. You know, directionally, I think esports is in a really cool winning spot. It's native digital. It's sort of all the things that the traditional sports leagues have to do and their media partners have to do over the next decade. Esports is native to that. So there's a huge advantage in that. I think the one major component that's been missing has been, you know, where does the money come from and how do you make money in this space? And so prior to the establishment of franchised teams, it was really difficult for outside capital investors to say, okay, I'm going to give you tens of millions of dollars to buy a spot in this league and pay your players, because you could evaporate, you know, if you just one bad game and you're sort of out. So creating the consistency of franchise systems, creating, you know, a big established season that's going to repeat every year, that kind of regularity and stability created the opportunity for investment, which is how a lot of these esports organizations were able to buy franchises from us. And then secondarily, it creates platforms for big global brands to take advantage of reaching in a very efficient way a large global audience of young people that they're not able to reach through traditional television and sports anymore. So I think we're going to see, it's early to call it a win because we're 1 week into the first season ever, but all of the initial indications are that the Overwatch League is going to be very, very successful. And our intention was to have it be a model of what the next generation of esports leagues would look like. So for the first 14 years of my career in esports, it was very Wild West. It was kind of tournaments and circuits, and we went through many years of having to relicense on an annual basis the rights to Activision and Blizzard IP and Riot IP and Valve IP. And now I think we're creating a base where it'll develop an ecosystem around this kind of very substantive structure and create a lot more opportunities to drive value in terms of asset value of teams and games, but also create new opportunities to make money for everybody who's participating.
One thing that's unique here is that we're talking about a game. Games, are evolving over time. Some of the games you were programming 15 years ago may not be in fashion or vogue. NBA, NFL have sort of become these, sports that it's never a question of like is the NBA gonna be replaced by another sport? But in the gaming world, it's like Halo used to be really big. It's no longer as big as an esport. Call of Duty is changing its game every year. Overwatch comes from Blizzard, an established publisher. It's been a very successful game, won a ton of awards, been very successful. But talk a bit about the idea of Overwatch as a platform. Is your belief that this Overwatch 15 years from now, people will still be playing Overwatch, or what's it going to take for it to still stay relevant?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think two things. If you look at the history of Blizzard, Blizzard thinks about, Overwatch is the first new IP out of Blizzard in 17 years, right? Like they think about new IP as a persistent platform that's going to live on for forever. So that's one aspect where Blizzard is very unique as a developer. I think the other is if you sort of look at the corporate structure and strategy of Activision Blizzard, it's all about building franchises, right? So continue to reinvest in the franchise value of a particular IP, which actually lends itself really well to esports. Some of the existing mechanics of how that work, like with Call of Duty, coming out new every year and things like that, it's not an exact fit for esports, but I think the Overwatch opportunity for the company was brand new IP, new game, without too much history and legacy that wouldn't fit in this new model. So we took that opportunity to kind of make have a leapfrog moment, which I think is making the rest of the industry kind of look at this and say, okay, what do we do to adapt to that? But I do think that the intention is that Overwatch is a persistent franchise that will last many, many, many decades, and just will continue to evolve with the sport itself over time.
So the people that are watching something like Overwatch League, and you guys just had Call of Duty tournament this weekend in New Orleans. MLG does more than just the Overwatch League. But the psyche of the person that's watching this, do you think people are watching Overwatch League because they want to learn how to get better at the game? Are they watching it because they appreciate how great these people are at the game? Are they tuning in for the human interest aspect? I'm sure it's a mix of that, but based on your experience, the people that are watching Overwatch League, do they go back and play more Overwatch right afterwards? I mean, how dedicated are they? Tell me a bit about the mindset of these viewers.
Yeah, I think it's going to evolve more towards the same patterns you see in traditional sports. Mm-hmm. We're definitely seeing more people coming in and watching who aren't playing the game. Right, who are just
do you think that's growing?
I think that's growing. Okay. I think that'll be a big growth area for us over time.
But don't you think eventually everyone that watches will probably end up buying the game or playing? I mean, it's part of Activision's hope, right? Yeah. So
I think, just to sort of paraphrase my boss, Bobby Kotick, he was asked recently in an interview, is this really a new property that you're creating that's going to create enterprise value for the company, or is this just a way to kind of market the game? Yeah. And he said, it's both. I mean, the good news is we can, as the owner of the IP and the creator of the league, we can take advantage of both things, and I think both dynamics are good. The more money we're making in the core business on the game, the more there is to reinvest into the league. For sure. But I think, very quickly, the league becomes on its own a big, valuable creator of it's going to generate a lot of revenue and value for the team owners who are our partners. It's going to generate lots of income opportunities for the players, right? It's the first time that players have a minimum salary and health insurance and all the kind of things that you should be getting if you're the best in the world at something. And this is just the very start. And in the initial commercial success in terms of the distribution rights deal with Twitch, the sponsorship deals with HP and Intel and some others that are coming out later this week and next, I think, you know, the indications are that this can be much more commercially successful than I think most people think, much more quickly.
So how many slots are there, do you think, for sort of big esports games? You know, you think of traditional sports, 4 or 5 big sports. Do you think it's going to be the same thing in esports, where it's going to be sort of, 4 or 5 big ones?
I think that's probably the case, at least short term. We have to build scale around each league. We have to build a global audience of scale around each one of these leagues. So in a way, the strategic objective is even bigger than an NFL or an NBA, because we got to grow a global fan base all at the same time. We can't just focus on U.S. and North America, which is a great opportunity, but also creates a lot more work. And I think that's one of the interesting things too, just to relate back to sort of fan behavior is already different on a regional basis, right? So in North America, we generally see a very, very highly indexed young male audience. In Korea, where everything started, it's more 50-50 or even skews a little bit more female in terms of the fan base. And so it's just different culturally in different places. So we have to, one, take advantage of that, but I think we can also look at places like, hey, esports has been big and mature in Korea for a long time. Maybe that's how the fan base globally eventually starts to play out.
And since we are here at Casual Connect, mobile, things like that, tell us a bit about, obviously a lot of people I think are watching some of these streams on their phones, but what's your sort of prediction on esports mobile? I know there's been Vainglory, there have been a few games that have sort of played with that. Is that a big opportunity, you think? Clash Royale's done some stuff?
Yeah, we'll see. I think, look, anywhere there's the capability for head-to-head or team competition, I think it creates an opportunity for esports activity to be created. Mm-hmm. I think mobile, just in terms of the form factor, is a little bit tougher. Just in terms of kind of control and things like that are traditionally really important in esports. But I certainly wouldn't rule it out. I think one of the most interesting things is that we just see lots of video consumption on mobile at this point. And obviously we own King and Candy Crush as well, so that could become something big that reaches a whole different audience. But I do think competition is sort of it's the key element behind esports and sports in general is how do you create an opportunity for people to through playing, get better at something and perfect a skill and become the best in the world at it, and then get recognition for that. And I think that was really the focus of the initial launch of Overwatch League, is how do we really celebrate these players who are the best in the world at what they do. So when we can lend that to other platforms and other game IP, I think we absolutely will.
Awesome. All right. Well, it sounds like we're out of time. I got a 1-minute thing. Are we doing questions or?
We have 4 minutes for questions.
4 minutes for questions. All right. Do you
Well, I will start with the first question.
Oh, great.
So with traditional sports, and I can watch soccer, football, even gymnastics. As a human, I can appreciate the skill and dexterity involved. If I'm watching an esport, I'm not familiar with the game, I don't really know when a perfectly executed rocket jump or combo, I don't appreciate the skill involved. So does that necessarily narrow the audience down to the people who appreciate the game, the people who actually played and had some experience of the game?
I think initially it does, yeah. Our initial audience are people who are, for Overwatch League, are people who are playing Overwatch, right? That's the easiest audience to get, and it happens to be 35 million people already, so it's a big audience to go after. But I think it's on us then to, just like with traditional sports, you try to explain to someone from Europe or South America how the NFL works, and it's not easy, right? I still have trouble understanding cricket, but it's one of the biggest sports on earth. There's going to be regional and cultural differences all the time. I think eventually, short term, our job as the league and with our media partners is to create the right kind of content, create the right kind of broadcast that are bringing in new fans, that it's not exclusive on purpose to try to really, give more red meat to the core audience. We do have to be expansive in how we're thinking about it. And the fact is, the Overwatch League, like Jeff said, we're talking about 16 games a week for months and months and months. We have a lot of opportunity to do that.
Okay. Time for one other quick question. We'll make it 2 minutes or less. Thank you.
Hey, Mike, thanks for the insights. Curious how you think about live sports being part of that experience, being people going to the stadium, becoming close, passionate fans as part of the city base. Right now, things are kind of based in LA and locations. Do you envision this being more traveling teams and people balancing going to these esports events in person versus kind of streaming them online? And how do you prioritize between the two over time?
Yeah, so the original intention from the inception of the Overwatch League was that each team would actually have its own home arena in its home city. And eventually that will be the case. And so Shanghai will play LA in a regular season game, and it'll be either in Shanghai or LA, and those teams will be there. In order to get the ball rolling, we decided to centralize that for the first season. We're still talking about kind of how that plays out into the next season. But I think, to get the league off the ground, we had to focus in on one location. But it will develop out. And among, I can tell you kind of anecdotally, amongst our owners, that's a very important part of this formula, is that they want to have a home city arena and build a fan base and kind of a commercial model around that as well. And just from being there in I don't know how many hundred of esports events over the years, from kind of studio settings like we have in Burbank at the Blizzard Arena, which seats about 450 people, the energy is electric. And then when you take that to the Staples or the Garden or something very, very big, when you have tens of thousands of people freaking out all at the same time, it's the same thing as for me watching a Yankees game, and because we're gonna win the World Series this year, so I'm really excited about that. But
and on that note, I think we're out of time.
We're out of time, so a round of applause to Jeff and Mike. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
So we're so honored to be here. Have a great conference, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.